Public space has become such an important space during the pandemic, when we are spending more time in our neighborhoods and, for instance, in parks, where we could find support, unity, and release to make sense of these still surreal circumstances that we are living, mainly based on conversations. Public libraries are also public spaces with an iconic architecture and, most importantly, a proven record of community-driven programming. My interest in this topic emerged as a graduate student conducting research in, in the New York Public Library across the street from the university. But it was really after I visited the Salt Lake City Public Library, the Seattle and Vancouver's, that I recognized the emerging trend of public library design at that moment, and that now constitutes almost a blueprint to public library design and programming around the globe. This is a book that I'm always happy to go back to. The work of 10 plus years on and off, it has provided the vantage point of a different temporal situatedness from 2009 to 2021. The public libraries have now a whole set of positions dedicated to community outreach and marketing, something that was just emerging in 2009. And after I was asked to write my previous book, Governing Disaster, about climate change preparation and adaptation after Hurricane Sandy, it was easier to secure a book contract for this project, even though this one began earlier. My area of teaching and research is urban sociology, and as such, I have been participating and observing urban life. I visited so many libraries, the library parks in Medellin and Bogota, Colombia, the public library in Vienna, among so many others. And I encourage you to do the same, whatever city you visit, when that is possible. The interdisciplinary character of my work, or the transdisciplinary character of working with colleagues from different disciplines, also needs some sort of public space engagement in the form of meaningful conversations to share our epistemological positions necessary to address the complexity of social life and urban living. So what were the research questions that guided this study? What is the meaning of contemporary public libraries, and how contemporary libraries' distinct characteristics are branded within the creative city urban development model as anchor institutions in the relationship to the cities where they are located. And the public libraries included in the book are Seattle, Salt Lake City, New York City in the United States, Medellin, Colombia. In Colombia, that's the only one that is currently closed because of structural issues with the library, with the building. Halifax, Nova Scotia in Canada, and the Biblioteca Alexandrina in Egypt. Previously, and all the way to antiquity, the Renaissance and Enlightenment, access to libraries and books were part of an elite's lifestyle, research, and education, led by rulers, monarchs, and religious leaders. The democratic values of inclusiveness and universal access is characteristic to liberal democracies, a kind of byproduct of industrialization and modernity. More recently, under neoliberalism and the retrenched welfare state, yesterday I was attending a webinar where a panelist introduced the concept of austerity urbanism. We saw reductions in social services and expenditure, austerity, and precariousness. Public libraries picked up some of that slack pre-pandemic to offer community-driven programming, supporting job search in the Bronx Public Library, workshops about entrepreneurial business in Seattle and Salt Lake City, but also in practically all the libraries included in the book. I have a whole section about the pandemic and the role of the state and how important it is to rethink that leadership role, but I'm going to skip it for purposes of time. We also need to consider the undeniable gentrifying force of these public library developments. And gentrification is something that I examined critically in previous edited volume on global grounds, urban change and globalization, as the then emergent trend of US ghettos, Harlem specifically, but especially the Seattle and Salt Lake City public libraries in the United States, where the former underwent the usual neglect of central city areas, and the latter was redesigned in an area that was considered outside the main desirable city center, or even the Medellin, Spain Library Park that explicitly sought to diminish violence and criminal activity in a Pablo Escobar territory with the Actions in My Neighborhood Urban Development Initiative as interventions in the urban fabric. The book includes chapters on the creative city model and branding that frames discursively, but also in terms of architectural practice, contemporary urban development policy, and the revitalization of specific areas of the city. The creative city model will cities compete to attract investors, residents of the global professional class, the creatives, and tourists, and branding are present in all the cities included in the book. The public libraries can be understood as anchor institutions to foment and build strong connections to the representation of the city. We are here talking about a global library, and this is a double entendre, a double meaning in terms of the impossibility of accumulating all knowledge in its universality, that is the library's drive and desire, right? The search for eternity that Borges so eloquently described in the Library of Babel, but also its global as an urban development trend of contemporary public library design, championing inclusivity, universal access, iconic architecture, and the branding of the city. The meaning of the library and the design of these spaces from the perspective of staff, designers, architects, and users is another chapter entitled Library Design for the Commons. There is a chapter for each one of the libraries to showcase their design and programming highlights, and a concluding chapter pre-pandemic to understand the adaptable quality of public libraries that in a pandemic moment have a more robust digital presence, building community for the network publics. I always wish people ask me when I was presenting my book, and what are the most surprising findings you encounter? And I'm going to mention a few. After looking at the different reports from the cities included in the book, Seattle, Salt Lake City, New York, Halifax, Medellin, Alexandria, and the public libraries who all have a digital presence in websites, it was surprising for me to find the creative city discourse so very present and replicated in a cacophony of discursive practices that emphasize quality of life issues and sustainability. They include inclusiveness, tolerance, diversity, and community, among others indicators. And this discourse was replicated across city majors, private sector, and library reports. A key question one might ask is, am I contributing to this cacophony of the creative city with this book? Hopefully, I am providing critical perspective in my enabling role and strong advocacy for inclusive public space. Another surprising finding was the indexes, the proliferation of indexes to rank cities in their competition to attract capital. As investors, the creative class of global professionals, there are indexes there are regional indexes that include, for instance, US cities, another one that included Mexico and Canada, and another one developed by a French scholar for Africa that includes Egypt. It is not too far-fetched, I think, that the likelihood of a global index might be available in the not too distant future and might include indexes that rank cities along their preparedness for extreme climate impacts and pandemics. There are also adjacent plazas that expand the libraries to the city's public space and to the city itself. And I think that during the pandemic, we have been so much in our familiar places, we miss of other spaces. And this is a title that I'm borrowing from Foucault's essay, where he introduced the notion of heterotopia, which I think to a certain extent the public libraries might represent as those spaces that step outside the industrial work center rhythms of technological time, if we wish to incorporate an Anthropocene critical perspective. They also represent what Borges aptly described as labyrinths, places where you can lose and find yourself or be transformed. I am sure you will appreciate the images of other spaces in the following sections. I cannot cover everything that I included in the book, but I certainly hope that either the presentation itself or the images you're about to see trigger your curiosity. This is the Salt Lake City Public Library. And their mission is to advance knowledge, foster creativity, encourage exchange of ideas, build community, and enhance quality of life. And this is exactly what I am referring to as this discursive practice of designing these missions that are really very similar in terms of content with values of inclusivity and universal access that contemporary public libraries represent. And this is the New York Public Library: to advance knowledge, foster creativity, encourage exchange of ideas, build community, and enhance quality of life. Seattle Public Library: to bring people, information, and ideas together to enrich lives and build community. Biblioteca España: this is Spain Library Park, Medellin, Colombia, actions with my neighborhood. This is an interesting design because they wanted to replicate the Andes Mountains that encircle the valley where Medellin is located. Halifax Public Library, Nova Scotia: a vital center for learning and culture in the heart of the community. And the Biblioteca Alexandrina, a place for open discussion, dialogue, and understanding. I remember one of the most memorable ideas Craig shared with me in the interview about the Biblioteca Alexandrina was the notion of public space as a theater and the library as a transformational space. How can design help build community in its spaces connected to the city and community-focused programming? I cannot wait to hear more from Craig and the Biblioteca Alexandrina. Thank you for being part of this conversation.